25. Black Hollywood stars who were drunk all the time. They had it all: the fame, the fortune, the influence. But what if we told you that behind the cameras, some of Black Hollywood's biggest legends were battling demons no one saw coming? From slurred performances to behind-the-scenes meltdowns, these 25 stars weren't just drinking, they were drowning. This isn't tabloid gossip. These are the real, raw stories of icons undone by alcohol. Some survived, others didn't. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because Legends of Black Excellence is about to reveal what the headlines never dared to tell. Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor wasn't just a comedian, he was a revolutionary. His razor-sharp wit and raw honesty changed stand-up forever, blending biting social commentary with deeply personal reflections. But behind the scenes, Pryor's life was far from laughter-filled. His struggle with alcohol was not just a phase or an occasional indulgence. It was a chronic, destructive force that shaped much of his adulthood. Born in Peoria, Illinois in 1940, Pryor had a traumatic childhood marked by poverty, abuse, and instability. He grew up in his grandmother's brothel, witnessing violence and chaos from a young age. These early scars would later manifest in his art and in his addictions. Alcohol for him became a coping mechanism long before fame ever found him. By the 1970s, Pryor had become a household name with groundbreaking performances on stage, television, and film. Yet as his star rose, so did his dependency. He often spoke candidly about his inability to drink in moderation. "Social drinking," he joked. "That's when you have 2 drinks and stop." I never understood that. Pryor frequently drank to black out to silence the emotional noise and psychological torment he carried within. The most infamous incident of his substance abuse occurred in 1980. During a drug and alcohol binge involving freebasing cocaine and high-proof rum, he suffered a near-fatal accident. He doused himself in alcohol and caught fire, sustaining burns over more than half of his body. He ran down the street engulfed in flames until police intervened and rushed him to the hospital. That moment became symbolic of a man literally and metaphorically burning from within. Though he attempted rehab and periods of sobriety, the cycle of addiction persisted. Even after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1986, Pryor struggled to stay clean. The disease eventually robbed him of his ability to perform, but not of his spirit. Richard Pryor passed away in 2005 at the age of 65. His legacy as a comedic pioneer remains untouchable, but so too does his cautionary tale, a reminder that genius often comes with demons, and without help, those demons can destroy even the brightest light. Red Fox. Red Fox, born John Elroy Sanford in 1922, was a trailblazer in stand-up comedy whose raw, unapologetic humor paved the way for generations of black comedians. While most remember him as Fred G. Sanford, the sharp-tongued junk dealer from Sanford and Son, few realize how deep his issues with alcohol and narcotics ran. Beneath his comedic brilliance was a man constantly at war with his own excess. Fox's offstage lifestyle was the polar opposite of the scripted humor that made him a household name. He was known to down drinks in staggering quantities, often before performances or during production breaks. His drinking was no secret among peers. In fact, he often made light of it in his routines, masking pain with punchlines. But in reality, the damage was real. What shocked even Hollywood insiders was his open use of hard drugs during his career peak. It was widely reported that Fox wore a small spoon on a chain around his neck, not for decoration, but as a tool to use cocaine discreetly during readings and rehearsals. His excessive consumption not only affected his health, but also complicated professional relationships. Writers and producers frequently had to accommodate his erratic behavior, which ranged from showing up intoxicated to forgetting entire scripts. Financial ruin added fuel to the fire. Despite making millions, Fox declared bankruptcy multiple times. IRS seizures, legal troubles, and unpaid debts only intensified his reliance on alcohol as an escape. Those close to him noted that he often drank out of frustration at the industry, at racial injustice, and at personal regrets. Tragically, his life ended the way he lived it on stage. In 1991, during a rehearsal for the royal family, he suffered a fatal heart attack. At first, castmates believed it was a joke, a callback to his famous heart attack gags. But this time it was real. Red Fox's life remains a complex mix of innovation and implosion. A man who redefined comedy, yet could never escape the grip of self-destruction. His legacy is bittersweet genius on stage, but chaos behind the curtain. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston had a voice that seemed untouchable, soaring, soul-shaking, unforgettable. With over 200 million records sold and countless awards, she stood atop the music world through the 1980s and 90s. But behind the platinum albums and movie roles was a woman quietly unraveling. Alcohol, long overshadowed by the headlines about drugs, played a critical and underreported role in her downfall. Born in Newark, New Jersey in 1963, Whitney grew up in gospel roots, but entered the mainstream as a pop diva with a pristine image. However, fame came fast, and the pressure was relentless. Underneath her dazzling performances, she struggled with anxiety, scrutiny, and intense personal pain. Her marriage to singer Bobby Brown introduced a chaotic chapter. Together, they became notorious for their volatile arguments, public spats, and shared substance use. While crack cocaine often grabbed the media's attention, Whitney herself admitted in interviews that alcohol was a near-constant presence. She described it as both a trigger and a crutch, a substance she leaned on to cope with emotional wounds. Her 2009 interview with Oprah Winfrey was raw and revealing. Alcoholism, she said, makes you either very nice or very mean, and I was both. Multiple rehab stints throughout the 2000s attempted to address her chemical dependencies, but the combination of alcohol and prescription drugs proved lethal. In the years before her death, friends reported erratic behavior, slurred speech, and visible signs of intoxication during public events. At times, she appeared disoriented or aggressive, far from the composed superstar she once was. On February 11, 2012, Whitney was found unconscious in the bathtub of her Beverly Hilton hotel room. The coroner's report listed heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors, but alcohol and prescription sedatives were also in her system. She was just 48. Her death sent shockwaves through the world. Whitney's story remains one of the most devastating falls from grace in entertainment history, not because she lacked talent, but because addiction, including alcoholism, chipped away at her brilliance until nothing was left. David Ruffin. David Ruffin's voice was unmistakable, gritty, emotional, and powerful enough to turn My Girl into an eternal anthem. As the frontman of the Temptations during their most iconic era, Ruffin's charisma and vocal brilliance defined an entire chapter of Motown history. But what fans didn't see was a man slowly being consumed by addiction, ego, and self-sabotage, with alcohol as one of the primary culprits. Born in 1941 in rural Mississippi, Ruffin endured a rough childhood. Orphaned early and raised in poverty, he found his escape through music. But when stardom arrived, so did unchecked indulgence. His drinking began casually, but quickly escalated as fame placed him under intense pressure. Alcohol soon became both his comfort and his poison. By 1967, Ruffin's behavior had grown increasingly erratic. He would miss rehearsals, arrive intoxicated to shows, and often isolated himself from the group, riding separately in a private limo. His demands became outrageous, including insisting the group be renamed David Ruffin and the Temptations. When the rest of the band refused, citing the group's collaborative legacy, he retaliated with absenteeism and public outbursts, many fueled by alcohol binges. Once fired from the Temptations, Ruffin spiraled further. Solo success came in fits and starts, but his personal life unraveled. Arrests for drug possession, reports of domestic abuse, and frequent hospitalizations painted the picture of a man haunted by demons he couldn't outrun. Those close to him said he drank heavily before performances and would often disappear on days-long benders. His addiction didn't just affect his health, it eroded his relationships, damaged his reputation, and drained his finances. Even after brief periods of recovery, Ruffin always seemed to fall back into the same cycle. A few shows, some promise, followed by another collapse. David Ruffin died in 1991 at age 50. Though the official cause was a drug overdose, alcohol was part of the tragic mix that had shadowed him for decades. Today, his voice still echoes through speakers, but so does the memory of a man who had it all and lost it drink by drink. Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson's rise to boxing superstardom was nothing short of meteoric. By the age of 20, he was the youngest heavyweight champion in history, a feared and ferocious athlete whose name struck terror in opponents. But outside the ring, Tyson faced a different kind of opponent himself, and alcohol became one of his most relentless adversaries. Born in Brooklyn in 1966, Tyson's early life was marked by violence, crime, and loss. After the death of his mentor, Cus D'Amato, Tyson's emotional support system crumbled. Fame, fortune, and unchecked freedom collided with unresolved trauma, and alcohol became his escape valve. Though the media often focused on his legal troubles, including a prison sentence in the 90s, behind closed doors, Tyson was drinking heavily and frequently. In interviews, he admitted to being a vicious alcoholic, often blacking out and waking up in unfamiliar places, unsure of how he got there. He recounted once driving 90 miles per hour while intoxicated with no memory of doing it, calling it a near-death wake-up call. His marriage to actress Robin Givens was marred by chaos, and his substance abuse only intensified the volatility. Tyson would later admit to faking sobriety tests, lying to doctors, and using alcohol as a way to mask his insecurities. "I drank to feel normal," he said, "but I always felt worse." Despite several failed attempts at sobriety, Tyson eventually sought professional help. He credited his turnaround to therapy support from family and a complete lifestyle change. He even returned to public favor with appearances in The Hangover and a one-man Broadway show where he candidly revealed the depths of his addictions. Today, Tyson is sober, but the scars remain. His body carries the weight of years of abuse, and his legacy is a complex mix of triumph and tragedy. While the world saw a champion, few knew the extent of his private suffering. Mike Tyson's battle with alcohol nearly cost him everything, and for years it almost did. His story is not just about boxing glory, but about the brutal fight for self-control outside the ring. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was a showbiz phenomenon. As a singer, dancer, actor, and comedian, he was the consummate entertainer, dazzling audiences from Las Vegas to Broadway, and starring alongside Frank Sinatra as a key member of the Rat Pack. Yet even as he broke racial barriers and redefined black stardom in the 1950s and 60s, Davis privately struggled with a dependence on alcohol that worsened as the spotlight intensified. Born in Harlem in 1925, Davis began performing at age 3. He never knew a life outside show business, and that constant pressure to be on took its toll. By the time he reached his 30s, alcohol had become a regular part of his daily routine. It was his method of winding down after grueling shows, numbing emotional pain, and coping with the loneliness that came from fame and racial isolation. Davis's intense schedule, performing night after night, traveling endlessly, only worsened his drinking habits. Friends and associates noted that he rarely appeared on set or at rehearsals without a drink nearby. While he could still deliver brilliant performances, those close to him worried about his increasing reliance on the bottle, especially when he began missing key engagements or appearing visibly impaired during appearances. His personal life added further strain. His interracial marriage to Swedish actress May Britt drew controversy, and the stress of being one of the first black entertainers to openly cross such lines in the 1960s contributed to his emotional unraveling. He admitted later in life that he often drank to silence inner turmoil, guilt, and the pressure of constantly having to prove himself. Medical professionals eventually warned Davis that his liver was deteriorating and that any continued drinking could be fatal. Fortunately, he took that warning seriously and made the difficult decision to stop drinking before it claimed his life. Sammy Davis Jr. passed away in 1990 from throat cancer, but not before leaving behind an indelible legacy. He was a groundbreaking performer, but also a man who masked his pain with liquor for decades. His story is one of both inspiration and caution, showing how even the brightest stars can be dimmed by what they try to hide. Flip Wilson. Flip Wilson brought joy to millions during the 1970s. As the first African American to host a successful network variety show, The Flip Wilson Show. He was a cultural force beloved for his hilarious characters like Geraldine and for his charismatic, easygoing style. But behind the scenes, Wilson was grappling with inner demons that manifested in alcohol and drug abuse, far removed from his jovial public persona. Born Claro Wilson Jr. in 1933 in Jersey City, New Jersey, Flip faced abandonment at an early age when his mother left the family. He bounced around foster homes and reform schools using humor to survive. That emotional trauma followed him into adulthood, and while his comedic skills made him a household name, they didn't heal his wounds. Alcohol, unfortunately, became his fallback. During the peak of his career in the early 70s, Wilson reportedly drank heavily, often isolating himself between shows with a bottle in hand. Though he was never publicly out of control in the way some of his contemporaries were, those close to him recognized a growing dependency that worsened after his show was canceled in 1974. Without the routine and spotlight, Wilson's drinking escalated, and he became increasingly reclusive. His struggles with substances became publicly known in 1981 when he was arrested at Los Angeles International Airport for possession of hashish oil. Although the charges were later dropped due to an illegal search, ruling the incident exposed his declining mental state and his ongoing battle with addiction. Wilson never made a dramatic public comeback. He largely disappeared from the spotlight, making only occasional appearances throughout the 1980s and 90s. Friends said he had grown weary of fame and spent much of his later life in semi-retirement reflecting on mistakes and past regrets. Flip Wilson died of liver cancer in 1998 at age 64. While he may be remembered for laughter and charisma, his later years were marked by solitude and the consequences of long-term substance use. His life reminds us that even those who make the world laugh the hardest may be crying inside, numbing their pain one drink at a time. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday, born Eleanora Fagan in 1915, possessed one of the most haunting voices in jazz history. Her performances were drenched in emotion, raw, honest, and unforgettable. Songs like Strange Fruit and God Bless the Child weren't just music. They were reflections of pain, resilience, and survival. But behind her stage presence was a tortured soul drowning in trauma and trapped in a cycle of alcoholism and drug addiction. Holiday's early life was filled with hardship. Raised in poverty, she was sexually assaulted as a child, began working in brothels as a teenager, and turned to music as a form of escape. Her career exploded in the 1930s, but with fame came temptation, and she quickly fell into destructive habits, including heavy drinking. While much has been written about her heroin use, Holiday's relationship with alcohol was just as toxic and persistent. She was often seen drinking before performances, sometimes visibly intoxicated on stage. Fellow musicians described how she'd slur lyrics, miss cues, or erupt emotionally during gigs. But the audiences still adored her even as she was falling apart in front of them. Her relationships often fueled her addiction. She married Jimmy Monroe, a small-time hustler who introduced her to opium, and later dated Joe Guy, a trumpet player and known dealer. The men in her life rarely helped her heal, they enabled or exploited her vices. She was arrested multiple times, most infamously in 1947 for narcotics possession. Even as she performed a sold-out concert at Carnegie Hall after being released, she was secretly battling withdrawal. Toward the end of her life, Billie's liver was ravaged. She continued drinking and using until her final days. In 1959, at only 44 years old, she died in a hospital bed with just 70 cents in her bank account and under police guard for another drug charge. Billie Holiday's legacy as a musical genius is unshakable. But her life story is a devastating example of how addiction, often fueled by pain and societal neglect, can swallow even the brightest stars. T.I. Clifford Harris. Clifford T.I. Harris rose to prominence in the early 2000s as one of Southern hip-hop's leading voices. With chart-topping hits like Live Your Life and Whatever You Like, T.I. built a reputation for confidence, success, and street-smart lyricism. But behind the bravado was a man quietly struggling with his own vices, and alcohol was a key part of his downfall. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, T.I. experienced firsthand the hardships of inner-city life. He began dealing drugs as a teenager, using hustling both as survival and identity. When his music career took off, the fame and pressure only intensified. Legal troubles, including federal weapons charges and multiple arrests, often made headlines. But less visible was his escalating battle with alcohol and prescription substances. After being released from prison in 2010, T.I. opened up about his struggles in interviews and memoirs. He admitted that during his darkest moments, he turned to alcohol not just to escape, but because it felt normal. "I fell deep into it," he said, describing how liquor became a substitute for therapy. He often drank before shows during studio sessions and at night to numb stress and anxiety. One of the turning points in his journey came thanks to another rap icon, Eminem. Having faced similar demons, Eminem reportedly stepped in to guide T.I. toward sobriety, encouraging him to seek help and offering mentorship. This support, coupled with T.I.'s desire to rebuild his image and family life, led him to confront his drinking head-on. Despite relapses and public setbacks, T.I. made significant efforts to regain control. He released more introspective music, took on acting roles, and spoke candidly about substance abuse in various platforms, helping to reduce stigma around addiction in the hip-hop world. Today, T.I. continues to walk a delicate line between celebrity and responsibility. While no longer in constant headlines for reckless behavior, the lessons of his past remain etched in his music and persona. His story is one of reckoning. A man who built an empire nearly lost it to alcohol and ego, and is still writing the next chapter of his legacy. Sidney Poitier. Sidney Poitier wasn't just a movie star. He was a symbol of dignity and progress during a time when black actors were often relegated to stereotypes. As the first black man to win the Academy Award for Best Actor 1964, Lilies of the Field Poitier carried the weight of representation on his shoulders. But while he appeared stoic and controlled to the public, his private life told a quieter story of emotional strain and a personal reckoning with lifestyle habits, including alcohol. Born in Miami in 1927 and raised in the Bahamas, Poitier moved to New York in his late teens to pursue acting. Isolated by race, accent, and poverty, he found himself emotionally disconnected. In his 2000 memoir, The Measure of a Man, Poitier admitted that his early years in America were full of cultural confusion, loneliness, and anxiety, all of which began to erode his physical and emotional well-being. Though he was never known as a heavy drinker in the Hollywood scandal sense, he became increasingly concerned with the subtle ways alcohol was affecting his body and mind. Poitier eventually made a dramatic shift. He gave up liquor completely, along with red meat, sugar, salt, and even milk. His decision to embrace holistic living wasn't born of crisis, but of clarity. A choice to maintain discipline, stay grounded, and preserve the legacy he worked so hard to build. He once remarked that in a city where temptations were endless, self-mastery was his rebellion. Rather than letting the industry consume him, Poitier stepped back, choosing longevity over indulgence. It's no coincidence that he lived a long, purposeful life, passing in 2022 at the age of 94, revered not just for his films, but for his example of control and grace. Poitier's story serves as a contrast in this list. Not a tale of drunken collapse, but of a man who recognized the early signs of imbalance and did something about it. In an industry that often rewards self-destruction, Sidney Poitier chose self-respect. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey has long stood as a beacon of empowerment, resilience, and success. Rising from a background of poverty, abuse, and instability, she transformed herself into one of the most powerful women in the world. As the host of The Oprah Winfrey Show, she inspired millions daily. But in one shocking on-air confession in 1995, Oprah pulled back the curtain and revealed something deeply personal. She had once used crack cocaine and struggled emotionally during that time, all while secretly battling addiction tied to a toxic relationship. What made this revelation even more jarring was the timing. Oprah was already one of the most successful figures in television. But in a segment focused on mothers in recovery, she stunned both audience and guests when she said, "I did your drug." It was a rare moment of raw vulnerability, one that helped break the stigma surrounding addiction for countless viewers who thought success and substance abuse couldn't coexist. While Oprah was never known to be a chronic alcoholic, she has admitted in various interviews that food, alcohol, and substances were all coping mechanisms during periods of emotional instability in her 20s. She never spiraled publicly like many stars, but her honest admission put her on the list of high-profile figures who used alcohol and other vices to soothe inner turmoil. Her journey to healing began through therapy, introspection, and spiritual growth. She began focusing on wellness, mindfulness, and purpose-driven living. Oprah replaced indulgence with intention building, not just a media empire, but a movement around self-awareness and self-improvement. What sets Oprah apart is how she turned vulnerability into power. She didn't allow her past to define her, but she never erased it either. Instead, she used it to uplift others. Her story isn't one of downfall, it's one of redemption and responsibility. While some stars hid their addictions or let them consume their lives, Oprah chose the rare path confronting them, healing from them, and then helping others do the same. Her past with alcohol and drugs may not dominate the headlines, but it's a significant part of what shaped the woman she became. Billy Dee Williams. Billy Dee Williams, best known as the suave Lando Calrissian in the Star Wars saga, and for his leading man charm in classics like Mahogany and Lady Sings the Blues, embodied cool sophistication throughout the 1970s and 1980s. With his deep voice, elegant demeanor, and striking looks, he became one of the first black men in Hollywood to be widely embraced as a romantic icon. But behind that poised exterior was a man grappling with disappointment, frustration, and a brief but meaningful encounter with self-medication. Williams didn't spiral into alcohol abuse the way some of his peers did, but he did experience a period of emotional instability in the 1960s and early 70s when his career stalled. At the time, roles for black actors were limited, and many of the more complex or high-profile parts were funneled towards Sidney Poitier. Williams later admitted that this professional roadblock triggered feelings of inadequacy and led him to experiment with substances. In a rare interview, he spoke openly about how he tried psychedelics and drank heavily for a short stretch, describing it as a period when he was desperate to figure himself out. He didn't glamorize it, rather he viewed it as a dark chapter where alcohol became a false comfort. He referred to it as a moment of self-exploration that nearly pulled him off track. Fortunately, Williams pulled back before his habits turned into full-fledged addiction. He found balance through painting meditation and refocusing on his craft. His breakthrough with Brian's Song in 1971 and Lady Sings the Blues in 1972 revived his career, and from that point forward, he made a conscious decision to avoid the destructive paths many of his contemporaries couldn't escape. Though not as publicly chaotic as others on this list, Billy Dee Williams belongs here because his early struggles were real, raw, and formative. He is proof that not all who walk near the edge fall over, but many do come close. Chaka Khan. Chaka Khan, the powerhouse behind, hits like ain't nobody through the fire. And I'm Every Woman earned her title as the Queen of Funk, with a voice that could roar, soar, and melt hearts in a single breath. Yet behind that iconic sound and magnetic stage presence was a woman engaged in a prolonged war with addiction, including a years-long battle with alcohol that almost cost her everything. Born Yvette Marie Stevens in 1953 in Chicago, Chaka grew up in a musical, politically active household. She joined the band Rufus in the early 70s, and by the time she went solo, her fame had skyrocketed. But success came with a cost. The non-stop touring, grueling schedules, and emotional stress wore her down. To cope, she turned to drugs and significantly alcohol. Chaka later revealed that alcohol had become a companion during the lonely nights on tour and in the aftermath of industry pressure. For nearly a decade, she drank heavily, not just socially, but to the point where it began affecting her performances and health. Friends noticed that her behavior had changed, mood swings, missed appointments, and a visible toll on her energy. But like many stars of her era, she masked it well in public. The turning point came through an unexpected conversation with fellow soul legend Etta James. According to Chaka, Etta pulled her aside and urged her to take her life back before it was too late. That wake-up call changed everything. Chaka entered rehab not just once, but multiple times, committing herself to the process each time with more intention. Eventually, she achieved sobriety and has since used her story to advocate for mental health and recovery, especially among Black women in the music industry. Now, decades sober, Chaka Khan continues to perform and inspire. Her survival is not just a triumph of talent, but of tenacity. A woman who stared down addiction and emerged stronger, using her voice not just for song, but for truth. Samuel L. Jackson. Today, Samuel L. Jackson is one of Hollywood's most bankable and recognizable stars, known for commanding roles in Pulp Fiction, The Avengers, Django Unchained, and more. But long before he became the face of fierce authority and sharp-tongued wisdom, Jackson was losing a private battle with alcohol and drug abuse that nearly destroyed his life and career. Born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Jackson discovered acting in college. But during the 1970s and early 80s, while trying to break into the New York theater scene, Jackson struggled with self-worth, financial insecurity, and the racial barriers of the entertainment industry. To cope, he drank heavily, often combining alcohol with crack cocaine. He later confessed that while outwardly functional, he was high every day for years, sometimes drinking until blackout and waking up with no memory of the previous night. His addiction began to affect not only his personal life, but also his professional prospects. Although he was gaining momentum on stage, casting directors became wary of his erratic behavior and unpredictable temperament, both of which were fueled by substance abuse. He once said that he worried sobriety would make him less entertaining or kill his creativity. The wake-up call came in 1991, when Jackson's young daughter and wife actress LaTanya Richardson discovered him passed out in their kitchen, surrounded by drug paraphernalia and empty liquor bottles. With their support, he entered rehab and began the process of recovery. Ironically, his breakout film role in Jungle Fever, where he played a crack addict, came just weeks after he completed treatment, drawing deeply from his own experience. Since then, Jackson has remained sober and incredibly prolific, starring in over 100 films. He has spoken candidly about his past, using it as a way to inspire others to seek help before it's too late. His transformation is not just a comeback story, it's a testament to resilience, accountability, and the power of family. Samuel L. Jackson's journey from a struggling alcoholic to a cinematic legend reminds us that redemption is possible even in an industry that rarely gives second chances. Martin Lawrence. Martin Lawrence became a comedy titan in the 1990s with his breakout television series Martin and blockbuster hits like Bad Boys and Big Mama's House. His high-energy persona, physical comedy, and razor-sharp wit made him a beloved fixture in Black entertainment. But beneath the punchlines and box office success, Lawrence was quietly unraveling, with alcohol playing a significant role in his downward spiral. Born in Frankfurt, Germany, and raised in Maryland, Lawrence was drawn to the stage at a young age. As his star rose, so did the pressures, relentless work schedules, tabloid scrutiny, and the weight of carrying multiple hit franchises on his shoulders. To cope, he began drinking heavily, often combining alcohol with other substances, leading to alarming public incidents. One of the most disturbing episodes occurred in 1996 during the filming of his directorial debut, A Thin Line Between Love and Hate. Lawrence reportedly had an emotional breakdown on set, fueled by exhaustion and substance use. He was hospitalized and placed on psychiatric watch, sparking concerns about his mental health and stability. Not long after, he was found wandering the streets of Los Angeles in extreme heat, brandishing a pistol and shouting incoherently, later confirmed to be under the influence. His erratic behavior continued into the early 2000s, including a physical altercation during the filming of Bad Boys 2, and lawsuits from co-stars alleging verbal abuse and aggression. Much of this behavior was later linked to his untreated substance issues and the emotional volatility brought on by alcohol. Despite the chaos, Lawrence began seeking help. With the support of friends and family, he entered rehab and took time away from the spotlight to focus on recovery. In later interviews, he acknowledged that alcohol had clouded his judgment and nearly ended his career. Today, Martin Lawrence has made a quiet but steady return to form, reuniting with Will Smith for Bad Boys for Life and maintaining a more grounded public image. While he rarely discusses his past in detail, the effects of that period linger in his legacy. Martin's story is one of immense talent, nearly derailed by self-destructive habits, a reminder that fame doesn't shield anyone from the dangers of addiction. Charlie Murphy. Charlie Murphy wasn't just Eddie Murphy's older brother. He was a bold, fearless comedian who made a name for himself with unforgettable storytelling on Chappelle's show. His true Hollywood stories sketches, particularly about Rick James and Prince, became instant classics. But behind the scenes, Charlie's life was marked by real struggles, including a deep entanglement with alcohol and street violence during his younger years. Born in 1959 in Brooklyn, Charlie endured a difficult upbringing. His father died when he was 10, and he quickly fell into a rough crowd. By his late teens, he had been arrested multiple times, and his involvement in robberies and street fights put him on a fast track to nowhere. During this period, alcohol was a constant, not just at parties, but as a way to numb emotional pain and heighten a sense of fearlessness in dangerous situations. Charlie eventually joined the U.S. Navy to escape his self-destructive path, but the habits didn't vanish. He drank heavily throughout his service and continued doing so even as he transitioned into acting and comedy. Though he didn't make headlines like his brother, insiders recall that Charlie was often the life of the party, but also the one who drank past his limit, frequently combining liquor with other substances. In the late 90s and early 2000s, as Chappelle's show skyrocketed to popularity, Charlie's lifestyle became increasingly intense. While filming, he would sometimes show up hungover or exhausted from nights of hard partying. He later admitted that his drinking stemmed from long-standing anger, grief, and insecurities. Friends said he struggled to let his guard down unless he was drinking. Fortunately, fatherhood and writing gave Charlie a renewed purpose. He began stepping back from the wild nightlife and focusing on health and stability. Tragically, his life was cut short in 2017 due to leukemia, but not before he had reinvented himself as a respected comic voice. Charlie Murphy's legacy is layered: a street-hardened survivor, a gifted storyteller, and a man who flirted with destruction before ultimately finding purpose. His journey shows how trauma and drinking often go hand in hand, and how some wounds never truly heal. Kid Cudi Scott Mescudi. Kid Cudi, born Scott Ramon Seguro Mescudi in 1984, emerged in the late 2000s as a singular voice in hip-hop, vulnerable, spacey, and emotionally raw. His breakout hits like Day and Night and Pursuit of Happiness weren't just club anthems, they were confessions of inner turmoil. Beneath the fame, Cudi was quietly fighting a relentless battle with depression, anxiety, and alcohol abuse. Raised in Cleveland, Ohio, Cudi experienced the trauma of losing his father to cancer at just 11 years old. The emotional void that followed shaped much of his worldview and later fueled his creative output. But success came quickly and overwhelmingly. When his debut album Man on the Moon blew up in 2009, Cudi was thrust into a spotlight he wasn't emotionally ready to handle. He began drinking excessively, using alcohol to manage anxiety, stage fright, and the imposter syndrome that plagued him. Behind the calm exterior, Cudi was unraveling. In 2010, he was arrested for felony criminal mischief and possession of liquid cocaine, an event that brought his substance abuse into public view. But while drugs often dominated headlines, it was alcohol that was his everyday struggle. A constant companion that blurred the lines between coping and self-harm. Cuddy has since been transparent about how low he sank. He admitted to using alcohol to feel numb, often binge drinking alone. The turning point came in 2016 when he voluntarily checked into rehab for depression and suicidal thoughts. It was a difficult, vulnerable moment, and a rare one in a genre where vulnerability was often frowned upon. Since then, Cuddy has rebuilt himself emotionally and spiritually. He's continued to make music that tackles mental health head-on and openly advocates for therapy, sobriety, and emotional expression. His tattoos of hope and peace on his wrists serve as permanent reminders of his rebirth. Kid Cudi's battle with alcohol wasn't just a phase, it was a chapter in a much larger story about survival. By turning his pain into art, he's helped countless fans confront their own demons and find hope in their darkest hours. Wendy Williams. Wendy Williams made a career out of spilling celebrity secrets, but her most painful truths were the ones she carried inside. Known for her fearless takes, shocking interviews, and unapologetic gossip, she became the face of daytime television for over a decade. But beneath the wigs, the quick wit, and the catchphrases, Wendy was fighting a secret battle, one that revolved around alcohol and substance dependency. Born in 1964 in Asbury Park, New Jersey, Wendy started her career in radio, quickly becoming known for her brash, tell-it-like-it-is personality. She wasn't just a radio host, she was a force. But with success came pressure, and with pressure came excess. Wendy has publicly admitted to being a functioning addict for years. She could deliver sharp interviews in the afternoon and party until 4 a.m., drinking and using cocaine, then show up to work again with only a few hours of sleep. Alcohol was a central part of this routine. It wasn't just social drinking, it was ritualistic, compulsive, and daily. Those closest to her, including former staff members, described her as frequently intoxicated during off-air hours. But Wendy's transparency became her weapon. She didn't shy away from her past. On her show, she admitted, "Nobody brought it to my attention. They were just watching me like a circus act." In 2018, after a string of on-air incidents, including fainting live on Halloween in 2017, Wendy entered a sober living facility. She later revealed that she had been receiving treatment for alcohol and drug addiction while still filming her show each day. She described this period as humbling and transformative, even referring to herself as a walking addict in recovery. Though her health and public appearances have since fluctuated, Wendy Williams remains a cautionary tale in Hollywood, a woman whose strength and candor made her a star, but whose inner pain drove her to self-medicate in silence. Her journey isn't over, and like many in recovery, it's ongoing. But her willingness to bring addiction out of the shadows helped start conversations millions were too afraid to have. Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah, born Donna Owens in Newark, New Jersey, is a trailblazing icon who has conquered music, film, and television with equal power. With her commanding presence and versatile talents, she's become one of the most respected Black entertainers in the world. But few knew that behind the confident exterior was a woman grappling with loss and leaning on alcohol during one of the darkest chapters of her life. Latifah's story took a tragic turn in 1992 when her older brother Lancelot Owens Jr. died in a motorcycle accident. The bike had been a birthday gift from Latifah herself. The grief was overwhelming and transformative. In interviews, she later admitted that the emotional fallout from his death sent her into a tailspin. She began drinking heavily, often alone, as a way to dull the guilt and heartbreak that consumed her. By the late 90s and early 2000s, her dependency was taking a toll. She was arrested in 2002 for DUI and possession of a loaded handgun, a charge she rarely speaks about in detail. Those close to her said the Latifah. The world saw the bold rapper, the sitcom star, the movie lead, was at times a facade. Off-camera, she was dealing with suppressed pain and an increasing reliance on alcohol to keep herself numb. Rather than let this pattern define her, Queen Latifah made a decision to reclaim her life. She sought counseling, leaned on spirituality, and began separating herself from the environments that encouraged destructive behavior. Her health improved, her performances sharpened, and her ability to connect with audiences deepened. In the years since, she's become a quiet advocate for mental wellness and sobriety, often sharing pieces of her story through subtle interviews or motivational speeches. She doesn't portray herself as a victim, but as someone who faced the abyss and made it back stronger. Queen Latifah's reign isn't just about breaking records, it's about breaking generational cycles of trauma. Her candidness about grief and recovery has helped destigmatize emotional pain in the Black community and shown that even queens can fall and rise again. Naomi Campbell. Naomi Campbell is one of the most recognized faces in the history of fashion. A global icon who shattered racial barriers and redefined beauty standards. With her fierce runway presence and stunning editorial looks, she reigned supreme through the 1990s and 2000s. But behind the catwalk, confidence was a woman dealing with immense emotional pressure, and for years, alcohol and drugs were her escape. Born in London in 1970, Naomi began modeling at age 15 and was instantly propelled into a whirlwind of fame. The demanding nature of the industry combined with relentless media scrutiny and personal trauma left little room for emotional healing. Her fast-paced lifestyle was often fueled by alcohol, not just as a party accessory, but as a way to cope with anxiety and grief. The loss of her close friend designer Gianni Versace in 1997 was a turning point. His murder devastated her, and she admitted years later that she spiraled afterward using both alcohol and cocaine to numb the pain. The fashion world, while glamorous on the outside, was enabling and indifferent. Naomi said in interviews that nobody intervened because drinking and substance use were normalized in that scene. She attempted sobriety multiple times, starting in 1999, but found it hard to maintain consistency. Alcohol especially lingered in her routine, from backstage champagne to late-night events. However, it wasn't until 2004 that she made a firm decision to get clean. She entered rehab and began addressing not just the drinking, but the emotional voids that led her there. In the years since, Naomi has become a vocal advocate for self-discipline and mental wellness. She acknowledges her past openly and uses it to mentor younger models, warning them of the industry's silent dangers. Her story proves that even the most flawless appearances can hide invisible battles. Naomi Campbell may have strutted through decades of fashion history, but her toughest runway was the path to healing. Tracy Morgan. Tracy Morgan, known for his larger-than-life personality on Saturday Night Live and 30 Rock, built his comedy on unpredictability and truth. But beyond the laughs and eccentric characters was a man who faced harrowing health challenges, substance abuse issues, and a near-death experience that forced him to reevaluate everything, including his relationship with alcohol. Born in the Bronx in 1968, Morgan was no stranger to hardship. He lost his father to AIDS when he was 19, grew up in poverty, and began using comedy as a defense mechanism. As his fame grew, so did the temptation to drown emotional pain in alcohol. By his own account, drinking became part of his daily rhythm, used to relax, numb, and distract. In the early 2000s, his alcohol use escalated. He was arrested multiple times for driving under the influence and disorderly conduct. His drinking also began affecting his physical health, especially as he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Doctors warned him that continued alcohol use would only accelerate his decline. He often brushed off the concerns until the consequences hit home. In December 2010, Morgan underwent a kidney transplant due to complications from diabetes, which had been worsened by years of drinking. But the true wake-up call came in 2014, when he was involved in a near-fatal highway crash that left him in a coma and killed a close friend. Recovery took months, both physically and emotionally. Since then, Morgan has spoken candidly about how the accident forced him to make permanent changes. He cut back on drinking, prioritized his health, and began attending therapy. His stand-up comedy now includes reflections on mortality, addiction, and the fragility of life. Though he still battles the long-term effects of past behaviors, Tracy Morgan is a living reminder that change is possible even after decades of self-destruction. His story is a blend of tragedy, resilience, and redemption, proving that sometimes the hardest role to play is your true self. Jada Pinkett Smith. Jada Pinkett Smith, a talented actress, producer, and talk show host, has long been admired for her intelligence and fearlessness, whether in front of the camera or at the red table. From her breakout roles in Set It Off and The Nutty Professor to her marriage to Will Smith, she has lived a very public life. But few knew until recently just how privately she battled with addiction, including a problematic relationship with alcohol. Born in Baltimore in 1971, Jada came from a background marked by generational trauma. Her mother, Adrienne Banfield Norris, struggled with heroin addiction, a reality Jada has discussed openly. Despite vowing as a teen to avoid repeating that cycle, Jada found herself gradually drawn into substance use. By her 20s, she was a self-described hard liquor drinker, regularly indulging in vodka and cognac to manage stress and escape emotional pain. She later revealed that her drinking became so normalized, she didn't realize how dependent she had become. During filming for The Nutty Professor, Jada took ecstasy and passed out on set, initially lying and saying she had taken expired medication. Looking back, she described that moment as a wake-up call, not just because of the physical reaction, but because of the lengths she went to hide her condition. Eventually, Jada realized she was what many call a high-functioning addict. She decided to stop drinking cold turkey and hasn't looked back. Now, as co-host of Red Table Talk, she uses her platform to discuss recovery, emotional honesty, and generational healing. Her transparency has inspired millions, particularly Black women, to address substance use without shame. Jada's story proves that addiction doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it wears a smile and keeps working, and it takes just as much strength to admit that as it does to change it. Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman, arguably the most eccentric figure in NBA history, was known as much for his rebounding dominance as for his wild off-court antics. A five-time NBA champion, Hall of Famer, and pop culture fixture, Rodman's life was fueled by unpredictability and for a long time by alcohol. Born in New Jersey in 1961, Rodman had a turbulent upbringing. Abandoned by his father and raised in poverty, he felt invisible most of his youth. When he finally rose to fame with the Detroit Pistons and later the Chicago Bulls, the spotlight was blinding and intoxicating, literally. Rodman wasn't just drinking to celebrate. He drank to cope, to feel accepted, and to escape the mental instability he rarely spoke about. His binge drinking habits became legendary. He would vanish for days on benders during the NBA season, sometimes returning hungover or still intoxicated for practice. In one infamous incident, he took a mid-season vacation to Las Vegas at the height of the 1997-98 Bulls championship run, later dramatized in The Last Dance documentary. His personal life was no less chaotic. He was arrested multiple times for public intoxication, including a well-publicized bar fight in 1999. His relationships, including a turbulent marriage to Carmen Electra, often played out in the tabloids alongside images of him stumbling out of nightclubs. Despite several attempts at rehab and brief periods of sobriety, Rodman's struggle with alcohol persisted well into retirement. In later years, he admitted that the fame made it harder to stay clean everywhere he went. People expected the party. Dennis and he delivered often at the expense of his own well-being. In recent interviews, Rodman has expressed regret and awareness, acknowledging the toll alcohol took on his body and relationships. He's still battling his demons, but he's no longer hiding them. Dennis Rodman's story is one of extremes: extreme talent, extreme fame, and extreme self-destruction. And like many others on this list, his most difficult opponent wasn't on the court. It was inside himself. Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg, born Calvin Broadus Jr., has long been associated with cannabis, so much so that many forget alcohol also played a significant role in his rockstar lifestyle. As the smooth-talking West Coast rap icon who rose to fame in the early 1990s with doggy-style Snoop cultivated an image of carefree indulgence, and for years that image was reality. Though Snoop is better known for his marijuana advocacy, he often combined smoking with heavy drinking. His early career was marked by Hennessy bottles in the studio gin at concerts and alcohol-soaked parties that carried on into the early morning. His 1994 hit Gin and Juice wasn't just a song, it was a declaration of lifestyle. According to insiders, Snoop rarely showed up to studio sessions in the 90s without a drink in hand, and his backstage rider routinely included multiple brands of alcohol. His drinking wasn't limited to celebrations. In interviews, Snoop has admitted that he used alcohol to mask pressure, grief, and fatigue. As fame surged, so did the expectations, and like many artists, he turned to booze for comfort. Over time, however, even he began to recognize the toll it was taking. He started missing cues during live performances, and his focus reportedly slipped during key recording sessions. In the 2010s, Snoop began rebranding. With the launch of his own gin brand Indago, he leaned further into the alcohol business, but behind the scenes he made a shift. He gradually reduced his own intake and began promoting moderation. He also started talking more openly about the impact excessive drinking had on his health and energy levels. Today, while still associated with a party lifestyle, Snoop Dogg is far more balanced. His transformation isn't about total sobriety, but about growth and control. He now prioritizes family, entrepreneurship, and legacy, proving that even icons can evolve past their wildest days. Toni Braxton, the sultry-voiced singer behind timeless hits like Unbreak My Heart and Breathe Again, has lived a life marked by soaring success and deep personal turbulence. Behind her elegance and poise was a woman quietly struggling to keep control, especially during the years when alcohol became a way to cope with mounting pressure. Born in Severn, Maryland in 1967, Toni was raised in a strict religious household where secular music and alcohol were frowned upon. But after breaking through in the 1990s with chart-topping ballads and Grammy wins, she quickly found herself thrust into an intense, demanding industry. The perfection required of her image and voice, combined with financial setbacks and health crises, pushed her to her limits. In interviews, Toni has admitted that during particularly stressful periods, she drank excessively. It wasn't wild partying that defined her behavior, but quiet overindulgence. Glasses of wine that turned into bottles, all in the privacy of her home. She began using alcohol as a stress reliever, particularly when her career was threatened by bankruptcy, and her lupus diagnosis left her both emotionally and physically drained. Toni revealed that there were periods in her life when she drank to sleep, to forget, and to push through public appearances with a smile. Those close to her described her as withdrawn, and even family members expressed concern over her declining emotional state. At one point, Braxton acknowledged that she was losing herself not in the fame, but in the pressure to maintain it. Eventually, Toni sought help. She checked into a rehabilitation center, not just for emotional support, but to reassess her relationship with alcohol before it spiraled further. Her recovery wasn't just physical, it was creative. Through music therapy and family grounding, she returned with a clearer perspective and renewed strength. Today, Toni Braxton continues to tour, advocate for lupus awareness, and speak openly about her past. Her journey serves as a reminder that even the most polished performers can carry hidden burdens, and that sometimes the most dangerous addictions are the ones you drink alone. Marion Suge Knight. Marion Suge Knight was once one of the most feared and powerful figures in the music industry. As co-founder and CEO of Death Row Records, he helped launch the careers of legends like Tupac Shakur, Dr. Dre, and Snoop Dogg. But behind his street-savvy bravado and multi-million-dollar empire was a man unraveling under the weight of power, pride, and addiction. Among the many vices that followed Knight throughout his rise and fall, alcohol played a key role in fueling his volatility and eventual downfall. Born in 1965 in Compton, California, Knight was a former college football player who transitioned into music management with a mix of charisma and intimidation. But as Death Row Records rose to dominate the 1990s West Coast hip-hop scene, Suge's personal life became increasingly erratic. Insiders described him as constantly drinking, not casually but excessively aggressively. Whether in nightclubs, boardrooms, or even during business negotiations, alcohol was often part of his presence. Multiple industry veterans have recalled how Shug would down hard liquor during meetings, often becoming confrontational or unpredictable afterward. He was known to lash out when intoxicated, yelling, threatening, or turning violent. Many of his infamous altercations, from fights with rivals to run-ins with his own artists, were reportedly fueled by booze. Alcohol seemed to amplify his paranoia and hair-trigger temper. By the early 2000s, Shug's empire had begun crumbling, weighed down by lawsuits, arrests, and internal collapse. Despite several jail stints, including for parole violations and assault charges, he remained in the public eye, often stumbling out of parties, visibly drunk, or behaving erratically in interviews. In those years, alcohol was both a symbol of his excess and a mask for deeper issues. The final blow came in 2015 when Knight was arrested for a fatal hit-and-run incident and later sentenced to 28 years in prison. Though alcohol wasn't the direct cause, many believe it contributed to his mental state during the confrontation. The once feared mogul who helped define a generation of hip-hop now sits behind bars, a sobering metaphor for a life consumed by power and poisoned by unchecked habits. Suge Knight's story is a chilling reminder no amount of money or influence can protect someone from the damage done by addiction, especially when it's mixed with ego and unchecked rage. From chart-topping icons to industry moguls, these stories prove that fame can't shield anyone from the grip of addiction. Some found redemption, others lost everything, but all remind us that behind every spotlight is a shadow. Do you think the entertainment industry enables this kind of self-destruction, or are these personal choices gone too far? We want to hear your thoughts. Which of these stories shocked you the most? Drop a comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more untold truths behind the fame. Let the conversation begin.